guilty on all counts.
We, the jury, on the issue join in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia, find the defendant guilty of aggravated murder.
Brendan Banfield showing no emotion as the verdict comes in. His mistress, the family's au pair, sharing details of their affair and his plan to get rid of his wife so they could plan a family and a future together.
He mentioned his plan to get rid of her.
There was no plan. Is absolutely crazy.
Two dueling stories, one truth. Prosecutors say it was the blood evidence that led to a conviction, taking us step by step through Brendan's plan, luring an innocent stranger into his home and staging the scene to make it look like he was the attacker.
He can pretend that this was a fling, an affair. He'd had them before, no big deal. He was in love with Juliana. He was afraid of losing her.
Tonight, an in-depth look at this high-profile trial, the verdict, and what happens next. Good evening. I'm Erica Gonzalez, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of The Case, Au Pair Affair. It was 3 weeks of testimony, it was 9 hours of deliberation, and one unanimous verdict. Brendan Banfield found guilty by a jury of his peers. 7 women and 5 men ultimately decided his fate. Guilty on 2 counts of aggravated murder, guilty on the use of a firearm in a felony, and guilty of child endangerment. Prosecutors say Banfield was having an affair with the family's au pair and orchestrated a plan to kill his wife, Christine, and frame a stranger, Joseph Ryan, for her murder. Tonight, team coverage. NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden is standing by for analysis. But let's start with Northern Virginia Bureau reporter Drew Wilder, who has been covering this case from the start. Drew, take us inside the courtroom when that verdict is read.
Erica, there are really 2 very contrasting emotions and storylines happening inside the courtroom late this afternoon. On one side, where the Commonwealth sits, you had the victim's family sitting behind them. You watched the father of Christine Banfield, the mother of Christine Banfield, overcome with emotion as those guilty verdicts were coming down. At one point, I watched Christine's father remove his glasses and wipe tears away from his eyes, and your heart just breaks for that family and what they've experienced and endured over the last 3 years. And then on the other side of the courtroom, with the defense attorney, John Carroll, you had Brendan Banfield, and the look on his face, or maybe even lack thereof, as these guilty verdicts were coming down. Again, Banfield appearing stoic, appearing emotionless. One of the prosecutors even said he looked cold as he's sitting there and hearing this verdict come down, and that's the exact same emotion that he wore throughout the majority of this trial, not seeming too bothered, not seeming too hung up or sad about really anything that transpired. Shortly after the verdicts were read, we heard from the prosecutors who led this case. Take a listen.
It's monstrous. I mean, that's really what it is. It's monstrous. But I've been doing this job for a while, and I can tell you that this defendant stood out to me highest above all the other murder cases that we've done in my 6 years here.
Everyone has commented on what was so obvious, that he was not truthful, that he was cold, that he behaved oddly in response to questions that should have elicited emotion, that he never spoke of himself as Christine's husband, that he didn't speak lovingly of his wife, that he showed absolutely no human emotion that we expected to see of someone in his position.
So now, Erica, we're kind of in this unique position with this trial. We have a co-defendant who has a sentencing pending, and then we also have a sentencing hearing for Brendan Banfield that's coming up in a few months. But the reality here is that we already know Brendan's fate because of the way the law's written.
That's right. So we know that sentencing will come in May 8th, I believe. Tell me a little bit about what happens in Juliana's case and how quickly we could see that come to a close.
Right. So remember, Juliana was a co-defendant in this case. Initially, she was charged with first-degree murder for the death of Joe Ryan. However, as this case started playing out and as some of the puzzle pieces started coming together, the prosecution offered Juliana a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Brendan Banfield. That brought the first-degree murder charge down to manslaughter. She pled guilty to that. She would get that manslaughter charge. She would have to testify against Brendan Banfield. Her sentence would be capped at 10 years. However, next week, the prosecution is going to argue in support of Juliana being released now after the time that she's already served in jail. She's been in jail for a couple of years to this point already. Once she is released, she will ultimately be deported back to her home country of Brazil. As you mentioned, Banfield's got his sentencing coming up in a few months. It doesn't exactly matter what happens in that hearing because he has to serve a life sentence for that aggravated murder charge, of which he has 2. So at minimum, he's serving 2 life sentences, Erica.
And we heard Judge Penny Azkarate ask the prosecution if they would have victim impact statements, presumably, when this goes forward. And Jenna Sands is audibly heard saying yes. So it is likely that we will hear some of the emotion that it seems like we were lacking or that we did not hear during this trial. Drew, stay with me. We've got much more. I want you to come in just a little bit. But in the meantime, the trial lasted 3 weeks with testimony from the au pair and Brendan Banfield himself. Let's take a look back at some of the key moments in this televised courtroom case leading up to today's verdict. The high-profile murder trial opened with the au pair herself.
It was part of his plan.
Okay. And when you say it was a part of his plan, whose plan?
Brendan's.
Prosecutors say Juliana Perez Magalhães was having an affair with Brendan Banfield and helped him plot his wife Christine's murder. They allege the pair used a fake profile on a sex fetish website to lure Joseph Ryan to the family's Herndon home, making it look like Ryan was the attacker. On the stand, Juliana testified about Banfield's motive for murder.
He basically said divorce was not an option.
Did he say why?
Money was involved.
She claims Brendan promised her a future, a family, and a way out. But under cross-examination, Juliana's credibility took hits. The defense highlighted her talks with documentary filmmakers, negotiating a deal while facing criminal charges behind bars.
You were charged with murder because you shot someone. Am I wrong?
No, you're not.
And so why would you deserve something because of that?
Not because of that. I didn't say that I deserved something because of what I did.
I didn't hear any details, so feel free to tell me why.
I'm saying for after, when this is over, for me and my family.
The week also included the chilling 911 call.
Fairfax County 911, where's our emergency?
My name is Brendan Banfield. I'm a federal agent. This is my house. There's somebody here. I shot him. But he stabbed her.
Jurors also heard about chaos at the scene that followed, including testimony that evidence may have been compromised in the rush to help.
We're gonna have to get him out of here.
Yeah, I know.
If you give him a second, don't touch anything else.
Knife's there, guns are on the bed.
The same body cam video showing Banfield at the hospital, allowed to wash blood off his hands before evidence could be collected, and showing the moment he learned his wife was dead.
Christine, I'm one of the doctors here. Your wife has died. So you were there, and it sounds like there was a lot of blood loss.
Yes.
And so I think that she died of blood loss. Her airway was actually okay. I'll call the medical examiner, of course, and we'll do an autopsy and make sure we know for certain. Everything that was possible to be done was done for her right away. You did a wonderful, you did everything that was possible. It's not a survivable injury.
In week 2, the most striking moment may have been what wasn't said that had us all talking. Christine Banfield's father took the stand. But instead of describing his daughter's life as a devoted mother and pediatric ICU nurse, he focused on a childhood blood disorder.
Remembering Christine's childhood, did you observe any medical symptoms that gave you concern?
Yes, several bruising, bloody noses.
I think what the prosecution is trying to say is that Brendan Banfield knew his wife would bleed out quickly. And if you remember the au pair's testimony, she said Brendan had her hang up on the first 911 call and then motioned to her when he was ready for the second. The implication is that he was waiting for her to bleed out.
The defense pushed back, arguing Christine wasn't fragile, pointing to athletic competition she competed without issues or injury. Later, detectives testified about digital forensics, including a search of Christine's devices going back 3 years, finding no history of her engaging in sexual content online.
We reviewed Christine's history. I think it went back to the mid-2000s. She had never so much as visited a porn site that we could find.
The trial shifted hard into the digital weeds in week 3. Days of technical testimony centered on phones, laptops, and websites. The defense brought in a private forensic analyst who claimed the data shows Christine, not Brendan, created and used the FetLife account. They pointed to timestamps and an email address, and a selfie taken the same day the profile was created. But prosecutors poked holes in the tedious testimony in this single exchange.
And we've made it very clear, I think, that you can only testify to what the phones were doing. You cannot tell us who was manipulating the phones. You cannot tell us who made the phones do the things. You can only tell us what the phones were doing, what the laptop was doing, and where it was located when those acts occurred, correct?
That's one part of my analysis.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything further, Judge.
Then the final turn. In a rare and potentially risky move, Brendan Banfield took the stand. He called his affair with Juliana casual, saying he's had other affairs in the past, and so had Christine, but that neither planned to leave the marriage.
Did you ever create any sort of a plan with Juliana?
No, there was no plan. At this point, our relationship is maybe 6 to 8 weeks old. I think that it's an absurd line of questioning for something that is not serious, that a plan was made to get rid of my wife. That is absolutely crazy.
But the prosecutor came with receipts, love letters to the au pair in jail, plans for a future, even possible baby names.
Do you recognize this letter?
Yes.
Again, you to Juliana?
Yes.
And in this one, you're discussing baby names for your future children with her?
That is something that you wanted to talk about.
But you are contending, again, these feelings, these very strong feelings, these let's be together for the rest of our lives feelings did not exist when your wife was alive.
Correct.
Okay, and they certainly did not motivate you to kill your wife.
Juliana and I weren't even together when Christine died.
You had broken up, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you need to kill your wife to get her back?
Definitely not.
Joining me in studio tonight is Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis. Chief, this crime happened 3 years ago, and I'll never forget something that you said to reporters that day outside the house. You said whatever happened inside the house was between the 4 people in it. Do you remember that day?
I do. 3 years ago, Erica, and thanks for having me. I'm thinking a lot tonight about Christine. I'm thinking a lot about Joe Banfield. I'm thinking about Christine's daughter, who's now 6. But right from the scene, when there's almost a 15-minute gap in between 2 911 calls, and the first 911 call is a hang-up, that gets my attention. It got our attention. And then throughout that very first day, when Brendan Banfield refuses to talk to the police about what happened, that's counterintuitive to everything I know about a man interrupting a killer who's butchering his wife. It just didn't make sense right from the very get-go.
From the beginning, though, I mean, we did not see a rapid arrest in this case. In fact, that took time. It was detectives that kept going back to the scene of the crime again and again. Some 8 months later, detectives find very noticeable changes in the house. Clothing, red lingerie that's been moved from the au pair's bedroom into the primary bedroom, photographs of them as a new couple. I mean, that was done down the line. How do you describe that type of police work?
Yeah, Erica, it was a thoughtful investigation. And at the end of it all, we had overwhelming digital evidence. We had overwhelming forensic blood evidence. And we had a cooperating co-defendant. But even if Juliana had not come forward and told us the truth about what happened, we were still going forward with the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office and charging Brendan Banfield. And kudos to Jenna Sands. She did a great job. Steve Descano, his entire prosecution team did a great job along with our detectives.
I, of course, have to ask you about a lot of what was brought to the stand by the defense, and the work of your police department came up throughout the course of this trial again and again. Part of the defense's strategy seemed to paint this picture of inner turmoil, questioning what was happening with the department, the handling of evidence, the seemingly sort of dwindling numbers of the homicide unit. What would you say to the defense and to how that was put on display?
So, Erica, every defendant in America is entitled to a competent defense. So John Carroll had a very guilty defendant and not a whole lot to go on. So he threw up a couple Hail Mary passes during the trial. And John Carroll enjoys a stellar reputation, 35 plus years in the criminal justice system in Fairfax County. I was absolutely disappointed, Erica, to see John Carroll take shots that he knows are untrue at the Fairfax County Police Department. Once he started throwing those Hail Mary passes, I had already known that we were going to prevail. Justice was going to prevail for Christine and Joe.
Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis, we appreciate you coming in, being in studio with us, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Erica.
When we come back, our NBC News legal analyst weighs in on today's verdict and the strongest evidence that was stacked against Brendan Banfield. So we're back now with the Brendan Banfield trial. This was a circumstantial case of he said, she said, and that's why the au pair's testimony was so pivotal. Here's a quick recap of Juliana's 2 days on the stand as she shared what she calls Brendan's plan to get rid of his wife and start a new life with her.
He mentioned his plan to get rid of her. He wasn't going to hire anybody because that is something that throughout investigation can be discovered easily. He had heard of a website called Fat Life. He said we would be able to find somebody that plays like aggressive or that likes playing with blood. The person would be invited to come to the house, and he needed to know that the person was willing, or he was going to do what he had in his mind.
Who would do the typing? Were you typing? Was Brendan typing?
Sometimes it would be him, sometimes it would be me by his instruction. He knew eventually we would have one investigation because there would be a murder. We needed to have some alibis.
We needed some alibis. It is that testimony that helped us get to today's verdict. I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, who's been watching this trial along with us. Kristen, how did the prosecution lay out its case to get to this conviction?
You know, they laid out their case as if they were playing chess. Not with one dramatic move, Erica, but by controlling the board from start to finish. They didn't rely on a single piece of evidence. They relied on a combination of things, from Juliana's testimony to the bedroom makeover to the crime scene evidence and the timeline that tied it over together. Every major piece the prosecution put down supported that same checkmate. And once the jury saw that alignment, checkmate was inevitable. So let me break it down, starting with Juliana's inside story, which the prosecution used to connect the dots. You know, Juliana was not a peripheral witness. She was an insider, a co-conspirator, and she admitted that she fired the second shot, killing Mr. Ryan. And that testimony gave jurors something very rare: a witness who could connect the dots of planning, connect the dots of motive, and connect the dots of execution from inside the conspiracy. And because of her testimony, the Commonwealth didn't have to ask the jurors to guess. They were able to walk them step by step through how this double homicide unfolded, using someone who was actually there. And then next, the bedroom makeover, that after picture. On its own, it wasn't proof. But chess isn't about one move, it's about positioning. The shift of the au pair's belongings into the primary bedroom, including intimate items like that red lingerie, it showed control, it showed replacement, and most importantly, for the elements of aggravated murder, it showed intent. And jurors are allowed to ask what changed after Christine's death and why. And the verdict tells us that that's what they did. Then comes the crime scene evidence. And this is where the emotion really drops out. Blood doesn't speculate. Blood follows physics. Where it was found, how it was moved, and what was missing really mattered. The prosecution grounded the jury in what the scene physically showed, and that evidence corroborated Juliana's account while undercutting the defense's narrative. And the verdict confirms that the jurors followed that blood evidence. And finally, the timeline that anchored everything together, the calls, the surveillance, the digital activity, that was the prosecution's endgame. Timelines strip away, spin, and replace it with structure. And once the jury trusted the timeline, alternate stories, including the one that Brendan Banfield told on the stand, simply couldn't survive. Put together, the Commonwealth didn't play a flashy game. They played disciplined chess. Every piece protected or corroborated the next. And in a case like this, the verdict said that the discipline won.
All right, Kristen, we got about 30 seconds here. We've been dissecting Brendan Banfield's testimony for the 2 days that he was on the stand. Do you think the defense made a mistake putting Brendan there in the first place?
Yeah, huge mistake. It didn't create reasonable doubt. It created credibility problems. Instead of explaining the evidence, he gave the jury a direct comparison between his words and the physical proof. And that comparison hurt him. In a case like this, silence would have been safer.
And looks said a lot. Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, our NBC News legal analyst, we appreciate you hanging with us tonight. When we come back, a look at one of the most salacious parts of this trial and what happens to the au pair at the center of the controversial case. We'll talk about it next. One of the most talked about moments in this trial centered on jail mail sent from Brendan Banfield to his mistress, Juliana Perez Magalhaes, while she was behind bars. The defense in this trial aired Brendan Banfield's dirty laundry. However, it was the prosecution that made it stink. In the letters, Banfield professes his love. Prosecutors say they prove this was far more than the casual affair that he had claimed. One letter, in fact, is 14 pages long. We're showing you excerpts from those letters. And in one of them, Brendan writes, "I want to share my life with you. I want to be your husband and have children with you. I didn't want more children before. You changed that for me. And I know that you'll be an incredible mother." In yet another letter, Banfield even discusses potential baby names. So this is, I'm going to circle sort of this spot right here. For now, I find boy names a bit more difficult. Robert Robbie came to mind after my father. I like Lucas and Ethan. Daphne is another that I would like. Chloe, I like what you suggested. So they were even talking about baby names, writing that he couldn't wait to see Juliana hold her hand and dream about the future. I want to go back to my colleague now, Drew Wilder. Final thoughts from you, Drew, on this case that you have covered extensively now for the past 3 years.
Yeah, the final thought is really with the baby that Brendan actually has on this earth, who he had with Christine, Valerie Banfield. She was 4 years old at the time that Brendan and Juliana guided her into the basement of the Banfield home, knowing that 2 floors above they were about to commit double murder. She's going to grow up without her mom. She's going to grow up with her dad, spending his life in prison for the murder of her mom. Your heart breaks for this young girl, just imagining what the last few years of her life have been like, what the rest of her life is going to be like, growing up without a single parent figure in her life. The only connection she's going to have with a parent is maybe a phone call or a letter to her dad, who's spending his life in prison. I said it before, I'll say it again. If you're the praying type, Valerie Banfield could sure use that tonight. Erica.
Our Drew Wilder live for us this evening. Drew, thank you for your coverage, and thank you for watching this special edition of The Case, the au pair affair. To see how the entire trial played out, you can follow us at NBC Washington on our YouTube page as well.